reported multiple Republican members of Congress telling CNN of an expletive-laced call between the former president and the House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy as the January 6th riot was taking place. Sources say McCarthy and others begged for help, but the former president had no intention of calling off the rioters. And now CNN is hearing from other sources who are pushing back on defense attorneys' attempts today to suggest that the former president did not know his vice president was in serious, potentially mortal danger when he tweeted that Mike Pence lacked, quote, courage. I want to go to our chief domestic correspondent, Jim Acosta, who's following the former president of West Palm Beach, Florida. So you have some new reporting about how sources close to former Vice President Pence are reacting to today's defense of the former president.
Right, Anderson. I mean, that was one of the moments that stood out for a lot of people when Michael Van Der Veen, the president's impeachment lawyer, said during this impeachment trial earlier today that at no point did Donald Trump know that Mike Pence was in danger up on Capitol Hill on January 6th when he was being rushed out of danger by U.S. Secret Service. That is just not the case. We know that that's not the case, but I talked to a source close to the vice president earlier this evening who said as well that that is not the case. That is not true. And when I asked whether or not Michael Van Der Veen was lying when he said that during this trial, this source close to the vice president said yes. Now, I will tell you, Anderson, aides to the former vice president are still fuming over President Trump's actions that day. They believe he did not do enough to make sure that Vice President Pence and his family were safe as they were essentially being rushed from danger on that day. And it sounds as though, because of what Michael Van Der Veen said during this trial earlier today, there are some lingering hard feelings, and maybe some of those feelings are hardening tonight.
And regarding Jamie Gangel's new reporting, any response from the former president's team?
No, we reached out, Anderson, and they just have not responded to that. I mean, I will tell you that what Jamie is reporting lines up with what I was hearing from sources earlier this week. And we reported this earlier this week, that former President Trump, then President Trump at the time, was, quote, loving the Capitol mob. He was loving watching the mob do what they were doing up on the Hill that day, that they were showing force, as one other advisor put it. And that is what the president at the time wanted to see. And so it makes perfect sense what Jamie is saying and what she's hearing from her sources, that the president at the time, when he was on the phone with Kevin McCarthy, was not showing any kind of concern whatsoever as to what was being unleashed on the Hill that day.
And I know you've been talking with former White House officials about their view of his actions on January 6th. What are they saying? Because really, there is, just in the public record, there's not a lot we know of we don't have any kind of minute-by-minute account, which would be obviously fascinating to see of what the president actually was doing.
We don't have that. And actually, I will tell you, Anderson, it's interesting that you asked that, because I talked to a former top White House official about some of this earlier today. And this one former official said it might have been beneficial to the entire process to have had hearings on all of this, to get to the bottom of what former President Trump and top aides knew at that time as things were progressing minute by minute. You know, when Trump decided not to participate in any of this and not testify, there was a huge missed opportunity to get to some of the facts as to what he was doing that day. But I talked to a couple of former top White House officials about this earlier today. They are still sickened by what Trump was up to that day, his actions on that day, how he seemed to be delighting in what was going on that day. And Anderson, you know, one of the aspects that really sickens some of these former White House officials the most is the way Trump was behaving towards Vice President Mike Pence. I mean, this is, as you and I have talked about on so many different occasions, this is perhaps the most loyal official under President Trump during that entire administration. And he was essentially throwing him to the lions up on Capitol Hill. And in the words of this one former top White House official I spoke with earlier today, Trump saw Pence as essentially the fall guy, blaming Mike Pence for not overturning the election results. And it is still something that really sickens people who worked for the former president. Although, Anderson, as you and I both know, there are still plenty of former officials who will believe until the end of time that Donald Trump didn't do anything wrong that day. But we have to be honest, that does not mean everybody who worked under former President Trump. There are a lot of former officials who were disgusted by his actions that day. Anderson.
And what about how the former president viewed today's hearings? I assume happier than he was the first day when he heard from the quality of his attorneys.
Right. I mean, it was a disaster earlier this week, and so he was obviously angry about that. But I talked to a couple of sources who are familiar with his thinking, and they said, yes, you know, that he was much happier today. But of course, why wouldn't he be happier today? When you listen to some of what these defense attorneys were saying, it sounded like Trump TV. You know, they were airing his grievances. They were airing his lies. They were giving credence to things that just weren't true. Getting back to this issue of Pence and whether or not Trump knew he was in danger. And so it was a cavalcade of whataboutism and lies and grievances. And obviously that is going to play well with the so-called audience of one, just as these former officials were playing for the audience of one when Trump was in office, they're playing for the audience of one when he's out of office, Anderson.
Jim Acosta, appreciate it. Thanks very much. Perspective now from CNN legal analyst Ross Garber, who teaches impeachment law at Tulane Law School, chief political analyst Gloria Borger, and two more CNN legal analysts, Laura Coates, former federal prosecutor, and Ellie Honig, a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Ross, I mean, House managers could theoretically call witnesses. That seems unlikely even after this Jimmy Gangelo reporting.
Yeah, it's not even theoretically. I thought the House managers did a terrific job in their presentations. The rules actually provide for an opportunity for the House managers or the Trump lawyers to request witnesses. It would be up to the Senate, which is controlled by the Senate Democrats. And let's keep in mind the perspective, which is this is probably one of the most significant proceedings in a democracy to have. The notion of an impeachment trial and to have it without witnesses, without any sworn testimony is extraordinary. I mean, we all know, we've all practiced law. I mean, in a dog bite case, you have testimony, you have witnesses, you have evidence, and we haven't had any of that in this proceeding. I mean, it's an amazingly quick process, and in my opinion, it's hard to justify how quick it's been.
Particularly since everybody is there. I mean, Tommy Tuberville, who spoke with the president, is sitting right there in the chamber, and he's telling the press exactly what the president said to him. For the life of me, I don't understand why Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republicans in the House, wouldn't feel that it is his constitutional duty to come out and tell the Senate exactly what his conversation with the president was, particularly now that it's been outed.
I mean, this is the guy who he went down to Mar-a-Lago
to kiss the ring.
Yeah.
And get the donor list. Okay, but I believe, excuse me for being Pollyanna, it is his duty to do this. You shouldn't have to force him to do this. He took an oath to protect and defend. And here he is. He needs to come out publicly and talk about these things, as do other people who spoke with him or spoke with the president or who worked for Mike Pence.
Well, you know, McCarthy actually talked about this call the day of the attack over on Fox News. I just want to play the clip of what he said then.
As this Capitol was being overrun, I called the president and I talked to the president. I explained to him what was going on right now, and I asked him to go and speak to the American public, speak to these individuals, and tell them to stop.
That's all he said.
And of course, what we're hearing is the rest of the story and how animated it was. And this is precisely why the attorney, Van der Veen, was so ineffective and his rudeness does not translate. Because think about this. He let it out there and made this statement that he has no idea what the president was doing. He certainly was not doing anything to stop or to hurt this in any way. But in doing so, he has allowed for this sort of information to really undermine the defense case. He's allowed it to linger right now and have this question of credibility of who are you supposed to believe? I mean, you've got McCarthy, and people know the conversation with McCarthy saying if the president...
Well, Mark Meadows has gone on Fox just yesterday saying, well, you know, the president was trying to get the National Guard. The president was very concerned. The president spoke in real time, calling for peace, even though real time, I mean, there was 2 hours that went by without the president saying anything.
Sure, and I'm sure he'd like to sell some magic beans, and there's a giant on the top, we'll have a golden goose. I mean, all these sort of fantastical statements about how they'd like to recreate and recast this narrative when there is no evidence. They didn't present it. The people who were supposed to present the evidence, I know the burden is on the House impeachment managers to bring the case, and they did that. But the people who raised a factual dispute in their briefing and in their actual statements have not provided any substantive corroboration of what they've said. Specifically, a flurry of activity to try to stop and confront these insurrectionists. Where is the evidence of that? Where is the information that Trump did anything to stop it? And that same question keeps lingering that Raskin asked. Why did he leave you out to dry? Why did you become sacrificial lambs in his lame duck presidency? They haven't answered that question, and now they have this out there that refutes the thing that they were saying about the rest of the impeachment managers, that they were the ones who were not credible. They had misinformed, mischaracterized. Sounds like they're the ones that just did that.
Well, Ellie, I mean, you were saying even before we knew about this McCarthy exchange or the details of it, that Jimmy Gangel, you said that the biggest question that needed to be answered is what did the former president know and when did he know it?
Exactly. So big picture, the House managers have put on a very compelling case here. Arguably the biggest gap, the only gap in the case is what did the president know and do during those key minutes and hours immediately as the Capitol was being sieged and afterwards. And now this new reporting. I mean, Jamie Gangel has answered the question better than the House impeachment managers have. And what this really brings up is the question of witnesses. Are we going to see witnesses? I think it's highly unlikely, but this is why exactly what Laura was saying. This comes down to issues of credibility. This is what testimony and cross-examination is for. And I'm getting a bit of a flashback to last year's impeachment with John Bolton, who we learned in the midst of the trial had this smoking gun evidence, but the Senate voted no witnesses. That was Republican control. Now it's Democratic control.
But maybe
so the burden's on them.
But maybe this congresswoman has broken the dam, and the witnesses will come forward. I mean, you can hope that the witnesses will do the right thing and come forward if they have information that they think is so important. I mean, is that impossible?
Let's not forget, there
the
are
rules
witnesses. They are there in the actual
Does anyone
room.
feel a
They are
dam
the
breaking?
witnesses.
I don't feel, there's no dam breaking though, is there? I mean,
And I think that's just it. I mean, right now it looks like the president has the votes for acquittal. Right now, that's the president is set up to win this trial. If the House managers want to take a legitimate shot at changing that dynamic, they're going to have to call witnesses. There's going to have to be new evidence. It doesn't look like that's going to be happening.
And just for perspective, I know the concern with calling witnesses is, well, this will draw things out. To this date, the shortest presidential impeachment trial we've had ever was last year, 21 days. This is day 4. So if it draws it out another week, I know it'll be a lot of work for all of us and for the Senate, but to get the truth here, is it worth it?
Yeah, but they're off next week. I mean, this is not happening. This is, I mean,
Well,
this is...
Anything can happen.
But they are the witnesses. I mean, keep in mind, we're talking about last year. I mean, John Bolton, I know he had a book and he wanted to not mess up with his release date and have the smoking guns. We're talking about every single person who is the actual juror. They are the witnesses. The Mike Lees, the Tubervilles, the people who were around them in that room, they know what happened. They remember the conversations. And by the way, they knew that no help came. They were there for those 2 hours plus amount of time coming back to the floor. So it's an odd exchange. It's an odd notion. But I think one of the reasons they're not calling witnesses is because they are in front of them right now. I will say, though, what I still think is missing, who was actually in the White House with Trump actually watching it? What did that person see? What did those people see? That would be, to me, the most direct link, as would be the person to show me that the National Guard or the reinforcement, that Trump had his thumb on the scale. Who's the paper pusher who heard that call?
Right, so
I'd love
and
to hear
we probably
from him.
won't hear that till, Mark Meadows one day, can't get any more speaking gigs or however he plans to make a living, and he's going to write a book, and that will have details, and that will be years from now.
And it opens a whole Pandora's box, and I take your point, and I see it. You also have a new Democratic president who wants to get his COVID response package through, and there's all this concern that's going to delay everything. But this is important.
This is an impeachment. Trials of judges sometimes take months. If you're going to do an impeachment trial, I'm going to talk to history now. Do not do it this way. This is not how you do an impeachment trial.
What about the commission? In my mind, I think they're thinking about maybe their thought is we'll wait until we have this bipartisan commission do the full investigation. That was what Vanderveen was alluding to today about the due process and the investigation period and having that. But I think to myself, what you're doing is essentially kicking the can down the road. I understand why they're making those arguments. But if you already know, which is very clear from the House impeachment manager's case, you already know that Trump did nothing, that he watched and sat idly by as our government was under attack and under siege. And so the investigation may provide some more fulsome, comprehensive information, but the high crime, misdemeanor, impeachable part, I think it's already there. The problem is they're fighting against common sense and political obstinance of people who already have made their minds up in spite of the obvious evidence.
One other consideration, the new Justice Department, with Merrick Garland likely to become our Attorney General within the next week or two, is going to have to make a decision about what they do about this whole Capitol riot. Obviously, they're already prosecuting the people who physically were in the building, but they're going to need to take a look at others who didn't physically go in there, up to and including the president. And all of this information that's coming out now is and could be relevant to their investigation, could lead to subpoenas, could lead who knows where.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. A lot more to discuss. I'm just thinking about that possibility. I mean, just from a political standpoint, though, obviously that, for the Biden administration, would cause all sorts of agita.
Yeah, Joe Biden has made clear he doesn't want to tell his DOJ what to do. That's absolutely the right thing. This is a tough decision that Merrick Garland's going to have to make.
Yeah.